AICPA Town Hall, a high-impact news broadcast to help you navigate the most pressing issues facing the profession. Get timely and critical information, real-time interpretation, and analysis. Learn strategies, best practices, and capabilities to drive long-term success for your clients and organization. Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time.
Good afternoon and welcome to this Thursday, May 19th broadcast of the AICPA Town Hall. My name is Michael Cerami, sitting in today for Eric Auskison, and I am thrilled to be with you here today. We have a full agenda as we do for every town hall, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Today we're gonna start with an economic forecast. We have Marcy Rossell back with us today, and we'll try to make some sense of the economy and where things are headed. We have Barry Melancon with us again, Association AICPA Association CEO and President. We're going to talk a little bit about DC and the impact on the profession. We have Carrie Hipsack and Lisa Simpson with us today to talk technical updates. And then we're just back from AICPA's Governing Council meeting, where we're going to share some top insights with all of you. And then lastly, we'll close with some open forum and closing remarks. So let's go ahead and jump in. Again, we have a great lineup for you today and a lot of pressing issues. I'd like to go ahead and bring in Marcy Rossell. Hey, Marcy.
Hey there, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. You must be pretty busy these days trying to make sense of things, but Marcy is with us once a quarter. Marcy is a leading economic forecaster, former host of CNBC's Squawk Box, and we like to bring her in quarterly to help us kind of navigate, particularly in these very uncertain times. So Marcy, it's great having you here with us today.
Well, it's great to be here. Boy, don't things change so very quickly. I just saw a headline that said, be careful what you wish for with the economy. So last time we were sort of praying for low inflation. We needed growth to slow down. Stock prices were going through the roof, and we just needed it to all kind of back off a little bit. And lo and behold, that's kind of what we got right now.
That's right, Marcy. You were back with us in January, and there's just been a bunch of activity, much of it out of our control that's kind of happened since then. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I know the stock market is not the economy. I mean, they're separate and distinct from each other. However, the market does have a pretty powerful effect on just how people feel about things and how things are working. So maybe you can start with just what is driving the market right now.
Well, I always like to say that markets don't lie, and they are very powerful forward-looking indicators of where the world might be headed. So when you see overall the stock market, take a almost 20% decline, I believe as of today, year to date, we're down 17% for the S&P 500. Of course, as an economist, that's going to sort of make me a little bit nervous because frequently prior to a recession, what you tend to see are stock prices, a few months before one hits, start to take a dive. However, I do think that there's something just a little bit more complicated happening. So while I do believe that sort of the probability of a recession, because of some of the developments we're going to talk about today, has definitely gone up, the stock market is responding, I believe, to rising interest rates and the prospect of the Federal Reserve doing so very aggressively over the course of the coming year. And whenever that happens, you always see a flight to quality. And you always see declines in the most speculative types of investments in the economy. So I brought to you guys a chart today because I just wanted to show you sort of what I believe is definitely the most speculative end of the economy right now. And that's been cryptocurrencies. And so this is a chart of Bitcoin. And you can see that the price of Bitcoin stayed fairly stable throughout 2018, 2019. Of course, when the pandemic hit, interest rates declined dramatically. We've been down at zero for 2 years now. And at the same time, we have a tremendous amount of quantitative easing by the Federal Reserve. And you also had a tremendous amount of fiscal easing by Congress. So this sort of, if you think back to 2008, 2009, the last time the Federal Reserve engaged in a lot of quantitative easing, you didn't have fiscal policy stepping up to the plate as well. So we get sort of both things happening. We are now in the process of tightening not only monetary policy, but fiscal policy is tightening dramatically as well. If you think about the $2.5 trillion that was sort of pumped into the economy in terms of income support over the course of 2020 and 2021, this year, all of that is sort of working in reverse. So we've seen the price of Bitcoin decline. We've seen the price of all cryptocurrencies decline. Anything that I would call the most speculative, riskiest sides of the economy, things like venture capital. You're seeing a lot of anecdotal evidence that in the venture capital world, things are getting a lot tighter. And of course, we've seen technology stocks decline more than the overall market. So even though the reports from Target this week and from Walmart haven't been good, those retailers that we think about as being tremendously stable, it's really what's driving things is a big decline in technology stocks as their valuations burst forth during the pandemic. They are now coming back down to earth. And I think this looks very, very similar to what we saw in the dot-com boom of the late 1990s into 2000. So for those of you who've heard me talk before, I'm always looking to history to give us a little bit of a roadmap to how this thing might play out. And I'm thinking that the world today looks very, very similar in terms of how it looked during that dot-com boom that turned into a dot-com bust back in 2000, 2001. And we didn't have cryptocurrencies back then. Back then, we had pets.com and technology stocks, which were sort of, I would say behaving much like cryptocurrencies. SPACs, NFTs, meme stocks are all behaving in this environment today.
Marcy, that's great. And, kind of segueing off that and drawing the parallel, you mentioned the kind of the end of the boom, the beginning of the bust. There were a lot of world events, frankly, that were happening at about that same time. So I think this dovetails well in just maybe a discussion around Ukraine and the war and the impact it's having, and maybe even a little bit about China and their lockdown.
Well, if you think about the war in Ukraine, it actually, from an inflation and supply chain issue, it couldn't have come at a worse time. And lay that on top of China's continued pursuit of a zero COVID policy that is bringing them the kind of lockdowns that mean that I saw a statistic the other day that the demand for oil in China is down 6.7% this year. So they are living through a dramatic sort of shock to growth to their economy. And I think this will prove in some ways, the world it's going to take a while for us to get our minds around what happens when an economy like China, which has been growing ever since they joined the WTO back in 2000, basically, what happens when an economy like that starts to slow? But I am actually of the opinion that the Russian-Ukraine shock to energy markets, the worst of that is probably over. And that if you think about where inflation is likely to head in the months ahead, we know that Russia is managing to divert its oil to China and India. They are both going to buy oil at a discount, around $70 a barrel from Russia, which means that demand from China and India for the rest of the world's oil will actually decline. And so I think we have reached the peak for oil prices. It has to do with deflationary pressures coming from China, but also the US rig count. So I brought another interesting slide here that I look at very, very closely. Oil prices and the US rig count tend to move in tandem. Now, the rig count just tells me how many oil wells are pumping in the U.S. economy at any given time. And you can see from this chart that goes all the way back to 2015 that that oil prices, when the rig count is really high, that tends to drive oil prices down. But as oil prices fall, rig counts tend to go down with them as well. So you can see that back in 2020, when oil prices went negative, The rig count in the US went from 800 all the way down to 250. Now, it takes time to bring US supply back online. But you can see from this chart that we are about 100 wells short of being back to pre-pandemic levels of US production. So US production gets back to pre-pandemic levels. That's consistent with oil at about $70 a barrel. Now, it's going to take us at least 10 weeks to get there, but I am of the view that supply issues are the worst is behind us when it comes to energy markets. Now, when it comes to food prices, that's something completely different, because we woke up after the invasion of Ukraine to the realization that Russia and Ukraine together account for 25% of wheat exports. And while this will be an inconvenience in the US, as we pay more for bread, as we pay more for pasta, as the Atkins diet begins to look much more attractive for many Americans, when you look outside of our borders in countries where people spend a greater percentage of their income on food, places like North Africa, parts of Asia, in places like that, rising food prices will be devastating. And they will also be geopolitically destabilizing. The last time we saw a spike in global food prices, it coincided with the Arab Spring. So when food gets expensive for people who are at subsistence level living, you see geopolitical turmoil accompany that. And so I think there will be broader implications worldwide for the spike in inflation. From an economic point of view, for the US economy, it won't feel good, but it won't be nearly as debilitating and disruptive as it has the potential to be in a place like Peru or Sri Lanka.
So, Marcy, you just hit on kind of the elephant in the room, inflation. So, I think inflation's rising. Some say it's peaked, it's peaking. I think people expect now it'll just come down over time. So I don't know if it was early this week or maybe last week, former Fed Chair Ben Bernanke actually was quoted as saying, we may very well be in a period of stagflation. So maybe you can kind of comment on that and help us understand a little bit more.
Well, stagflation in the traditional sense, and the type of stagflation that we experienced in the 1970s, was a period of high inflation. Back in the 1970s, it was over 10%. We haven't hit those numbers yet. We sort of, I believe, maxed out at about 8.7% year over year. In the 1970s, every year, inflation was coming in at about 10%, and it was unrelenting. At the same time, you had high rates of unemployment as well. You had unemployment in the early 1980s reach 10% and kind of hang out there after that recession. So Bernanke, however, I think he's referring to something that could be much more short term in the second half of this year, where inflation rates as measured by year over year inflation remain stubbornly above 5%. So even though inflation is likely to come down, it's going to take over a year to get back to the 2% level. At the same time, supply constraints and shifts in consumer sentiment, those two things mean that growth will take a step back. Now, I don't think it will hit employment. The unemployment rate is 3.7%, and you still have millions of openings in the economy. But I do think you could have this strange situation where prices remain high, yet growth in the U.S. economy pulls back just a little bit. I don't think you're going to see an outright recession. If you do, it will be very mild. But I do think that in terms of using the word stagflation, it's going to look like a mini version of what you saw in the 1970s, but nowhere near to that degree.
That's great. Thank you, Marcy. I want to bring in Barry for a second here. I know he had some follow-up questions, particularly how it impacts everything you're talking about, our members and their clients. But Barry.
Hi, Marcy. Great to be with you again. You just sort of, made a comment about a recession, and if you said, might not be that big of a recession, or maybe not that big of a feeling. our members, and many of them, 10,000 of them or so every town hall, really work with small business in a lot of ways. Some of large business on here too, but they work with them. Either they work for them or they're their clients. And I think, the trusted advisor notion that we have sort of worked with you on, and we certainly were a big player in, and as we got into the COVID situation, what's some practical things they should be opening up this discussion with their clients on, particularly as it relates to the risk associated with a potential recession, even if it's mild? What are the real, what are the real key industries? What are the real key, key points that they should, in this trusted advisor role, be putting on the table with either their bosses or their clients that are the entrepreneurs?
Well, I think that I sort of recommend to people all the time, you always need to be stress testing your business model for higher interest rates, because that's the world that we're living in right now. So thinking that we're going to go back to capital being essentially free, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So can you live in a world where short-term rates, on a 5-year note, look more like 5 or 6% instead of 3 to 4%? Can you live in a world where mortgage rates are between 5 and 6% as opposed to 2 to 3%? So that is the first thing. But also, I do think it's important to remind people that, again, we have a roadmap from history. And for those who have been in business for over 20 years, they remember the late 90s and the early 2000s, the last time we saw a situation like this. I'm not expecting anything like 2008, 2009, where credit conditions seized up, because you haven't had all the speculative lending over the course of the pandemic that you had leading up to the last great recession. So we find ourselves in that sort of late 90s, early 2000s situation where if you are connected to the tech industry, it's probably going to be tough. But if you've struggled to find talent over the last 2 years, I expect labor markets, or the balance of power in labor markets, which has been so rough for about 18 months now, it's about to get a little bit easier to find staff, because we know that there are hiring freezes in technology. And in some instances, there are even smaller venture capital related technology firms that are actually laying off workers. So we're sort of at the beginning of that. And I think some of the stresses that small businesses have been dealing with, supply chain issues, you can't get parts, all those things, they are turning very, very quickly. And some of the conditions for these businesses are actually going to ease over the next 3 to 6 months.
So let me just follow up on one that we really haven't gone into detail on, and that's the housing market. Obviously, everybody always focuses on the housing market, and frankly, a lot of the clients that people who are in public practice on this town hall are going to have touched the housing market in some form or fashion. And so, what do you see in the housing market, given sort of this tightening up a bit, obviously interest rates being higher, and certainly throughout COVID, the housing market was, particularly as there was flight out of big cities and stuff, the housing market was a pretty rich part of our economy.
Sure. And in some places, like for instance, Sarasota, Florida, over the course of the pandemic, prices were up 50%. And anytime prices go up like that, everybody sort of remembering what happened in 2008, 2009 gets a little nervous and says, hey, are we setting ourselves up for another bust? And I don't think so, for a couple of reasons. Number one, you don't have the leverage that you had back in 2006, 2007, going into the financial crisis of 08, 09. Lenders have kept their standards very high. You don't have the no-doc loans. You don't have the variable interest rate loans that you had back then. Only 15% of mortgages in the United States are variable rate mortgages. So you don't have a lot of homeowners that are extremely vulnerable to rising rates if they already have a mortgage. By the way, that is not true in a place like Canada. It's not true in the Scandinavian countries. Many of their mortgages are adjustable rate, which leaves them very vulnerable to rising rates. And the other thing, people have been buying homes not because they expect the value to go up, but because you have so many millennials who are starting families, who need a house, want to put a roof over their heads. And all of that means that the demand has not been speculative for new homes. It's actually been very, very real and grounded in fundamentals. Now, I don't expect prices to continue to go up in the year ahead the way they did before, because we finally have some evidence that housing supply is beginning to catch up with demand. So that's a recipe for much more normal housing markets. And so for those of you who have those millennial kids who are dying to get into that first home, who've been priced out of the market, outbid, don't have the cash, those are the buyers who actually stand to benefit from some of the heat coming out of the housing market that I expect over this year.
And I would suspect on the construction side of housing, because supply chain has been a big part of that as well, the high price of lumber originally, but then even the appliances and all the things that go into new construction. So that might actually get a little bit more normalized than from where it was. Is that right?
We know that that's happening. If you sort of dig down into the sort of results from Target that sort of roiled markets over the course of this week, where they said, hey, we have rising inventory, we have tighter, smaller profit margins than we expected. What's not moving any longer are refrigerators, appliances, all those things that we've been dying to get our hands on. So we have some evidence that supply chain is loosening up. Automobile manufacturing was up 3.9% last month. So across the board, anywhere there were supply chain issues, except when it comes to food, right? So we got problems with eggs, we've got problems with wheat, but when it comes to all those things that we import from China and from all over the world, there is some evidence that because Americans in particular are going back to spending money the way they did prior to the pandemic, more services, more travel, more events, and they're less likely to be remodeling their kitchens, less likely to be in the market for a boat, an RV, all those things. As we go back to spending our money the way we did prior to the pandemic, that has a ripple effect all the way across supply chains in much the same way that it rippled in a negative way for the last 18 months.
And one last one, I'm going to cheat one more while we have you. Just a little bit on employment. You touched on that, and it's obviously on everyone's mind in a certain degree. I mean, you have certain factors of coming out of COVID and sort of the challenges of the world, people maybe racing to retirement a bit earlier. You have, from our profession standpoint, human capital supply at the entry level, more than 1 million less students in colleges and universities, even a higher percentage lower in the community college systems. And you did talk about like tech employment, and you may be able to find people in the tech space better because of some of the macro things that you discussed. Any other thoughts on the overall the employment market? Because clearly every business is facing the significant challenges on those low unemployment numbers, and really the attitude to work that has shifted as well.
Well, part of the sort of attitude to work, that balance of power between employers and employees that shifted so dramatically during the pandemic when the unemployment rate has gotten so low, I think some of that's going to ease off. I think that just like I think inflation has peaked and it's coming down, I think the balance of power in favor of workers has probably peaked as well. As you start to see certain industries curtail hiring and maybe even lay workers off, all it takes is a little bit of that to improve things from an employer point of view, for things to kind of get back to normal just a little bit, where, you know, people are actually going to have to show up for work and continue to show up to work to simply keep their job. So I do think that a little bit of sort of growth pulling back is going to improve that situation as well. But in terms of baby boomers retiring, they're going to keep doing that, my friends. And in terms of sort of not being enough young people born to replace all those millennials that are moving into their mid-careers, that's a demographic trend. And demographic trends take 18 years to change. So Barry, you're not going to be around for that. I'm sure not going to be around for that. None of us are, probably. 18 years, long time from now. I hope to be fishing in Florida by that point. So it's not going to be probably.
If you can afford a house in Sarasota, you
exactly.
Well, I would say, Marcy, you know, I think if people sort of tuned in today and they said, "Oh my goodness, we're going to hear an economic update." I mean, if you sort of summarize your points, well, you know, if we have a recession, it might not be that too bad. Inflation's probably peaked or is not going to really be as big of a problem. Housing sounds like it'll be okay. Energy prices It'll take a little bit for the rig count to get up, but energy prices are going to probably stabilize, maybe come down. I think you would just sort of this grand presenter of positive, or at least reasonably positive news.
Yep, because when I take the positive approach, I'm right about 95% of the time. That's better odds than blackjack. I'm going to go there.
Hey, Marcy, this
Also
was
better odds than fishing, by the way.
Marcy, this was fantastic. Really appreciate having you on, and we will see you again in about 90 days or so. So thanks again, and hope you have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, Marcy.
All right, Barry. So moving to DC, we actually have some breaking news today, Barry, on DC. So let's go ahead and jump right in.
Yeah, probably you wouldn't say you would hear DC and come away as maybe as positive as Marcy just gave us, I would say, just for the participants here. Let's talk a little bit about a couple of things. You've been hearing for the last several weeks a Ukraine aid package. That actually, breaking news, as we always say in the town hall, about an hour ago that got through the United States Senate. So it's on the way to the president's desk. Obviously, that's going to get signed. Now, the important thing here is it sort of clears the way for some other types of things that could move in the legislative process. Now, let's just remember, before we talk about some of those specifics and sort of the rhetoric that might be around those, there are very, very small number of days left in this legislative cycle. You're already seeing the elections, every member of the House up for re-election. We've already seen primaries in many different states that have taken place, some this week, some last week. So, members of Congress balance being in Washington and how many days they're there and having to run for re-election. And of course, a third of the Senate up for re-election. So, but the fact is with Ukraine moving through, I think we've been telling you that the Congress itself wanted to be part of the process on Ukraine. And that's been, what this real aid bill has been about. So that's done. But right after that, there was a vote in the Senate on sort of putting more resources into the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, particularly focused on those that didn't get through when the money ran out, the first go around. That failed on a procedural vote, meaning there was not enough votes in the Senate to actually bring this to a vote, effectively killing this, again, in these limited number of days. So for those of you who have clients or you're in those businesses, that's not likely to come back around, certainly not in the short run. You will hear some discussion. You'll probably hear some news, and depending on what state you're in and where they sort of sit in the ranking of how high of a state tax state they are, you will hear members of Congress talking about the potential of legislating some positive relief in the SALT area, the deduction for state and local taxes. There's a lot of pressure in these elections to bring good news back home. One of those things that could be is some relief on the cap in that area. That's a hard sell. That you will hear a lot of rhetoric on it. It's going to be very, very, very difficult for that to get through the Congress. It's not going to stop many of your clients thinking it might be getting through the Congress because of the news that's related to it. But it's probably, like the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, probably not going to make it through the process. And I think all of these things also open the door to a couple of others that are out there. There's a China bill that's out there that could have some tax provisions in it related to e-commerce and commerce with China. That is a potential. This could give us some room for some tax extender legislation. There's some extenders that actually didn't get extended from last year. Some more that are set to expire during this year. So there, it does open up a little room for some of those type of issues passing through.
So Barry, it looks like the IRS has folks scratching their heads again. We had some stuff going on this week. You could share with us.
Yeah, I was just with hundreds of CPAs earlier this week, and I think scratching their heads is sort of a polite way of saying what the frustration is on this. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of concerns, and a lot of misinformation as well that's in this process. 30 million unprocessed, predominantly, they would say all information returns. You can think of it as manual 1099s were destroyed in March 2021 that now comes to light. This is raising huge criticism, not only in the profession, but also on the Hill, on Capitol Hill, and in Congress. Mainly around the issue of lack of transparency. They didn't tell anybody about it. The risk of what does it really mean to taxpayers. I think just let's try to answer some questions. The first thing we said, we responded, and basically we said, look, we have a lot more questions, and Congress, and part of their oversight function over the IRS, here are questions that you need to be focused on. And we've been working with members of Congress who have been asking us for help in that particular way. Now, related to that, though, it does point to this informational return aspect. So it's not a direct hit on taxpayers. Of course, the questions come out, well, how do you know there weren't uncashed checks in there? How do you know there weren't other things that were in that process? And this is certainly what we're hearing from members talking about, this notion. We know there remains a huge backlog in the IRS. And if those of you who are constant visitors to the town hall, you know the points that we made about practical solutions to the backlog. I will tell you another aspect here. We've also talked about the need for the modernization of the IRS. Some of that in structure, like a center, if you will, a direct unit that focuses on preparers so that you can solve problems. We would argue some of that can be self-serve, solving taxpayer problems at your clients. Those things, along with the overall technology platform, take resources, take appropriations. And when something like this happens, that just makes that part of the process maybe more distant into the future, because the distrust, the uncertainty, the dissatisfaction, the grumbling from constituents just adds to the sort of the environment that is around the IRS today. And it's pretty intense. I've been around a long time, and the environment around the IRS today is pretty intense on Capitol Hill because of where they are, the service levels or lack thereof. And I have to say, and I just said this at our council meeting, we'll talk about that in a moment. And I always preface this, and I really do mean it. I mean, the IRS is made up of men and women who, want to do the right thing. They don't wake up in the morning saying, I want to do the worst possible thing. But, it just seems to be that there's this continuing process of bad news or lack of service that's coming about that's highly frustrating for preparers and taxpayers. And that is permeating on Capitol Hill, which means a rougher time for the IRS rather than a smoother time. Now, let me just make one other point while we're dealing with the sort of the backlogs and the difficulties. And I've been involved in a lot of discussions on this, our Washington team, our tax team, and that is the due date issue. And, over the years, over many years, and different iterations of talking about due dates, it's one of the most divisive topics in our profession. On any way you characterize it, you can almost get a 50-50 deal. I always say it's between 45 and 55% of people who believe that way. I was with some small practitioners at the beginning of last week, and I was talking to 4 of them. We were standing up, and they were all for changing the tax due date on a permanent basis. 3 others joined the discussion, and basically their feedback to the 4 was, what are you, nuts? How could we ever support that? That wouldn't be good. So, that's not quite my 55-45, but that percentage of 4-3 was really how the tenor of that discussion goes. We do have a task force that we have working, and we do have younger professionals involved in it, because some of this about history and what due dates are and how people work, there are some generational issues in that process, and we want to make sure we take a hard look at that. Changing April 15th is a big deal. I like to say it's almost equivalent to saying we're going to change, July 4th, or we're going to move July 4th. It's a pretty sort of known and focused day in American population. But that's not to say there aren't some things that should and could be addressed. And, the reality is it would take literally congressional action to move anything on an April 15th date. There are problems associated with that. State coordination becomes a huge issue when you start to talk about that issue with all the due dates that sort of follow and move around. But there are the issues of information returns like 1099s and corrected 1099s and K-1s. There are the issues of the complexity of what should be a relatively simple process of extending a return. Could there be ways of looking at doing that in a more sort of user-friendly way, dealing with payments with somewhat of a safe harbor approach? that would tamp down the need to make as many calculations at that time period, and then a whole host of other things that people suggest. And so we always do, and it's another time to look at the due date issue. Our tax section is very much active, and our tax executive committee is very much active in this process, and we will continue to do so. But even in the best of circumstances, if you were going to deal with April 15th, it's not happening in this year. And if it were to happen in the best of circumstances, let's say in the next year, you would have futuristic application dates because all of that couldn't take place. It exacerbates the technology challenges and issues with the IRS. So it's not necessarily a panacea, at least as it relates to how you might actually deal with changing that. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. It's on the agenda, and it's a tough issue out there.
Thanks, Barry. And I know we got a couple of other quick hit items here. Again, maybe under the category of how interconnected a world we live in, the war in Ukraine is at the doorstep of the profession here with.
Yeah, I just really want to make this point. And every time I've been speaking, I say, look, you probably, every CPA firm, no matter how small, probably has a client that's touching Russia in this environment. It got a bit worse a couple of weekends ago with when Treasury Department issued a statement that says basically you cannot provide accounting and consulting services to any entity that is in Russia, U.S.-owned entity that is in Russia. Now, that brings into question a lot of compliance issues. What about tax compliance? So what we have been saying to members is this major point. If it's related to business transactions, unfortunately, because the executive orders are so complex and undetermined, your client, probably with your help, needs to consult legal counsel. As it relates to tax compliance, we are working with Treasury. We're trying to get some type of definitive answers. Do you really mean people shouldn't file tax returns? Because you do have a compliance element here. And do you, how can we clarify exactly what that is intended to be as opposed to just the rules, so that we could get a broader profession-wide answer to this process? Our team is working on this very, directly working with Treasury to try to get some answers in that. So stay tuned. As we can get anything, we'll certainly push it out to you.
And the PPP and EIDL fraud bills, Barry?
Yeah, just a real technical point here. The Congress very easily extended the statute of limitations related to PPP and EIDL. Really, it was about aligning the statute of limitations for those PPP transactions that were done through fintech solutions with what it is through a traditional banking process. But I think the message here is, as we talk about ERC, which we will with Lisa here in a moment, as we talk about ERC and other things, this is an area that Congress could be looking at in the whole panoply of government assistance of extending the statute of limitations in all of these programs.
Thanks, Barry. And let's go ahead and bring Lisa Simpson in. Hey, Lisa.
Hi there.
Great to see you. So ERC credit mills, Lisa.
We're continuing to hear from our practitioners about their clients being inundated with some really aggressive marketing on the employee retention credit. As a reminder, ERC is complex. There are some gray areas. What we're hearing is that some of the marketing is around kind of whitewashing the eligibility requirements and taking a broader approach to ERC eligibility than CPAs would. We're advocating that you continue to make sure that you're talking to your clients about employee retention credits, and just following up to make sure that they're not engaging with one of these what we're calling credit mills without you being involved in the conversation, because it could have some pretty lasting implications to your clients.
And Lisa, we're going to produce some information, some frequently asked questions, so that as you try to communicate sort of the credit mills issue to some of your clients that are, asking questions about it, you have something to point to from us, like we did on a lot of the PPP and other government programs, something that you could point to from us to help really focus the attention of your client in these areas, and not to just sort of go down this path.
And we are hearing from practitioners that clients are starting to get audit notices from the IRS or from Treasury around the ERC credits that they applied for. If you all are getting those notices for your clients, can you let us know? Just put it into the Q&A if you're getting those, or if you've heard about it from your clients, because we do get the sense that the IRS is going to be looking into the eligibility and applicable calculations around ERC.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. So Carrie, let's go ahead. I want to give you and Lisa the floor as we move into the broader technical update.
All right, let's jump into our Alphabet Soup biweekly update. So Carrie, we've talked about the quality management standards in the past, and this is going to relate to audits, reviews, and other services. So why don't you give us the update there?
Great. Thank you, Lisa. As you mentioned, the quality management standards have made an appearance on the town hall before. They have been an exposure since February of 2021. For over a year, you may have heard about these standards as the applicable standard setting bodies requested, received, and reviewed feedback. 1 week ago today, the Auditing Standards Board, ASB, as Lisa mentioned, we like our alphabet soup, approved these standards. And just yesterday, the Accounting and Review Services Committee, known as ARSC, approved a standard specific to accounting and review services. More information will be released in the coming months, but I'd like to provide a quick refresh on the purpose of these standards. In short, these standards represent a change from a policy-based to a risk-based approach in audit and assurance quality. This will require firms to assess individual risks and then adjust their QM approach in response to those specific risks. Additionally, the standards aim to guide engagement partners as they determine their necessary level of oversight and the amount of work that they can delegate, whether it be to teammates or internal or external specialists. The effective date isn't until December 15th, 2025, so there's a long ramp-up time. But as I like to say, luck favors the prepared, and it's best to start planning ahead. On this slide, we have a look at the statements that are expected to be released in June. The top 3 statements come to us from the ASB, and the fourth and final comes from ARSC. As these final statements are released, the AICPA will begin releasing more resources to provide greater insight on the standards and thoughts on implementation. As more information is available, we'll bring back a subject matter expert to the town hall to go into more detail about the standards, as well as potential tech and non-tech solutions for implementation.
Right, so that's our update on QM standards. And moving on into the some other letters of the alphabet, you've got some governmental audit updates for us.
Yes, we'll take a quick look at the specialized area of the 2022 compliance supplement that was released on May 11th from the Office of Management and Budget, known as OMB. I'm going to try and cut this a little bit short since we're running short on time, but I'll hit some of the highlights based on some of the other topics that have been on the town hall. This supplement is updated annually, and the 2022 supplement is effective for audits of fiscal years beginning after June 30th, 2021. If a member of the Government Audit Quality Center, or GAQC, you may have received the GAQC alert number 441, which provides some highlights of the supplement. So I'll go over some of those key highlights here. The supplement is almost 2,000 pages. So instead of posting this as a resource, we included the link on the previous slide. And then the GAQC is working on breaking the supplement down into sections, and they will post that online as they get that broken out. In the meantime, 2,000 pages is a lot of content to sort through. If you're most interested in what may have changed from 2021, I'd like to point out Appendix 5 of the supplement, which provides a list of changes. So now we're moving into some programmatic changes. Can we go back one slide, please? The first one I want to point to you is the SVOG, which has been in existence for over a year, but this is the first time it's made an appearance in the supplement. A note was added in this section that indicates auditors could use the 22 supplement as a resource as they develop their approach for a single audit subject to the 2021 supplement. However, further commentary indicates that there is no requirement or expectation that auditors do that, so it's really at the auditor's discretion. One thing I did want to point out here is that the supplement states it's to be used for audits of non-federal entities with SBOG funding. However, for-profit entities should be aware that the SBA has stated intentions to issue separate audit requirements, and guidance for those audits will be posted upon completion at sba.gov. Just a couple of other.
Carrie, we'll run through the others just really quickly because you've got a lot of great links in the resources. So we've got some updates around the Provider Relief Fund. And then I think you've got another, one of my favorites, the Coronavirus Fiscal Recovery. It's laid out on the next slide. So if we can, let's get to that one. There we go.
Yep. Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds. Not much easier to say than CSLFRF, but there it is. Some of those changes were highlighted, but again, running a little short on time. So I just want to bring to your attention the training from the GAQC, which is the 2022 Compliance Supplement and Single Audit Update. That's happening on June 9th from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern. Again, there is a lot of content to digest, so I recommend staying ahead of that by taking some training. And last but certainly not least, we have a last minute plea to please take the PCPS Top Issue Survey if you have not yet had a chance to do so. It is about a 10-minute survey. It really helps give us, Lisa and I, direction, as well as the rest of the association, direction for resources that your firm needs. So help us help you by giving us some insight into what your top issues are and what you expect your top issues to be in 5 years.
Thank you, Carrie. Sorry to push you there a little bit. So I think Michael and Barry are going to join me back on the screen. And as Barry mentioned, we were at the AICPA Council meeting earlier in the week. So I think Barry wanted to hit some quick highlights.
Quick highlights here. So let me just first say, what is AICPA Council? Many of you may not know that, but it's like it's a governing body, our input into strategy and the issues of the day. It's representatives from every state. It's like a House of Representatives. I hate to make that comparison, but it's like a House of Representatives where there's so many CPAs from each state based on the population of CPAs in that state. And, we've already talked about government and economic, but some key components is that we have a major profession-wide initiative on the people side that is, about the enrollments. I related that when the questions we had with Marcy that was earlier, focused really the role of firms, the role of organizations like us and state societies and state regulators, and of course the academic community to make sure that pipeline of future generations of CPAs flows. And it's a tough human capital issue. It's not like a single answer to the situation in here, but they're clearly, we have a major program going away where everybody has different accountabilities to really have a concerted profession-wide solution here.
We have some great resources that we'll be bringing back to you in future town halls, just to make sure you're aware of what all we have that you can download and leverage.
Yeah, and Barry, I think, kind of focusing on this slide real quick, I just think, this whole concept of trust, I mean, even hearing Marcy speak and just how this, it underpins a free market society, and it's at the core of the profession.
Right. So just a couple points on that. We looked at three major elements of the profession. We looked at the tax issue, which we've discussed at length here and in previous town halls, and really a bit about what does the tax client of the future look like? What does the tax practice of the future look like? And we had breakout sessions on that. We also talked about the re-engineering of the finance function, what CFOs and small and medium-sized and even larger enterprises are looking at with the technology, cloud computing, different, what we would call CAS from a public accounting perspective, how that's really changing the base of what is accounting. And the third was really in the area of accounting and auditing as well, and all the changes that are happening in that space, including how we're trying to, and you'll be hearing more about this, what we call dynamic audit solution, relook at what the audit is about. But all of those things are wrapped into the issue of the world is thirsty for trust. We don't trust many things in society today. We don't trust news, and we don't trust the government, and we don't trust, in some cases, business, and we don't trust information flows in other ways. And really, we are this trusted profession, and that's an incredibly powerful position. This wheel really symbolizes all the different areas of how what we're doing as a profession and as an organization really is designed to enhance that trust. The stakeholders, employees, investors, bankers, et cetera, the trust that we bring to the table. And really, the world we're in demands it, and we're best positioned to deliver it. And you'll hear more about this, but that's really the focal point of where, as the profession prepares itself for 2 years and 5 years and 10 years and 15 years from now, that is really the key. That is the hallmark of our profession.
And I think that's a great tie-in to the conversations that we've been having with practitioners over the last couple of weeks at council, at a big community meeting that we had last week as well. And it all ties in back to the conversations we've been having on town halls about, thinking about your strategy. And some of the conversations we were having were around what does the ideal client look like so that you can leverage this trust relationship. And, the feedback was that we want to be looking for clients who value what we do and the insights we can provide. So building that trust into every client relationship that you have will help you kind of focus on your strategy and figure out who your client is, who your ideal client is.
Great. Well, thanks, Lisa. Thank you, Barry. Really shared a lot of terrific information today with the group. I think just kind of for open forum, not a specific question, but, Barry, maybe just invite you to give a closing comment or observation based on what you heard Marcy talk about earlier and kind of the implications as you're looking out 6 months just from a profession standpoint in general.
Well, I think the first takeaway is, and what we try to do in these town halls is give you things that could be on the agenda to be sitting down with your boss or your client. And you heard me ask her that question. There's so much information, again, going back to the trust component, there's so much information about what you hear and newscasts and things of that nature about the economy and about, the next 6 months or the next 9 months. I think, we have found, Marcy, to be very practical on that. And we try to bring that to you to try to, to give you an opportunity to have those types of discussions. You can take away some of the points that she made with your clients, depending on what industry they're in. I think the other issue that she talked about, she came back into the human capital element. Technology is going to continue to expand and have a big impact on our profession. The juxtaposition on that is that I think some of the technology positions, as she predicted, will sort of loosen up a bit. That market will start to shift a bit because of some of the economic conditions. I think that's good news for firms. As you embed technology into the structure of how you deliver services, it's good news for CFOs because technology is a huge component of how you re-engineer a finance function. And then, the world economic issues that are out there. I think it's important for us as Americans to really understand, and I thought she made a great point about, how food is such a large part of disposable income in different parts of the world. So the things that we're going through economically, they hurt. Your clients will talk about it. Their employees will talk about it. But there's another, large chunk of the world in which that element is also different. And as we talk about supply chains and codependencies that really do exist in our world today, I think having that frame of reference as a business leader, which hopefully every CPA really is in their environment with clients, is an important perspective to add to at least help people think in a broader way.
Thank you, Barry. Spot on. Lisa and Carrie, I do have 2 more technical questions we can close with. Just on PPP, any guidance for folks who missed the deadline to apply for forgiveness? Is there any light you can shed? And maybe just second point there is ERC, the eligibility audits. Is the focus on owner employees or other eligibility requirements?
I'll start with ERC because we don't have those details yet of the nature of the audits and what they're looking for. Those are both two great topics that could be subject to scrutiny in an audit. So, but no details yet.
I could take the PPP one then. I did notice in the chat that there was a reference to the 10-month period, and I did want to clarify that borrowers can apply for forgiveness for PPP up until the loan maturity. The 10 months only refers to when payments have to start. So I just want to make that clear that with PPP, it's either a 2-year or a 5-year time period for which they can apply for forgiveness, depending on when they got their loan and when they worked with the lender to obtain either that 2-year or 5-year loan period. So just keep that in mind when asking about the eligibility for forgiveness applications.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Carrie. Barry, I want to give you just final word before I do have some closing slides.
Just a small tidbit. We talk about having created a community with all the participants of the town hall. The number one issue that people, at coffee breaks, et cetera, at our council meeting that I just referenced, talked to me about, and I know talked to Eric and others about, was the town halls. So they're part of you out here. The people who are, giving input into strategies, et cetera. You're out here just like listening to all of these questions, and it really makes a difference on, prioritization in our organization. So thanks for your participation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Carrie. Bring up our slides. So just a summary, I think, great discussion today, great participation, great contributions from our panelists. Again, continued uncertainty in the markets as the economy continues to, be challenged by a number of different risk factors. We had 2 votes this week on Ukraine aid and RRF. AICPA is pushing for congressional action for IRS on the destruction of documents issue. Carrie and Lisa did a great job sharing the new quality management standards. And I think, Carrie said it well, never too early to begin preparing. So you might want to be considering that now. We had to move quickly through OMB, but that is available. That content is all available in the slide deck and post email information. You heard about how council is sharing a lot of the feedback that you all are sharing with us week in and week out, and then no better bullet to close on than just how critical trust is, and it remains the foundation of both the profession and the free market system. So again, a lot of great content shared again today. Once again, here's our AICPA Town Hall schedule. I do want to call your attention. AICPA Engage will be the week of June 5th in Las Vegas. So the next town hall is actually going to be a live broadcast from Engage. It will be on a Tuesday. It's Tuesday, June 7th at 4 p.m. Eastern time. I believe I was told there was a little bit of a technical glitch in what went out earlier, but you'll get something post-show with the proper links. So please be sure to register. It's going to be a great broadcast. Again, stay connected. We really do. What's happening now is we're beginning, like Barry just alluded to, get out into the field and meet in person again with members. And it's really wonderful to hear all the comments and the level of engagement around the town hall. It's just wonderful to be inputting names to the faces, or faces to the names, I should say. And just being out and about again is really been uplifting. I know the team loves hearing the town hall stories at conferences and events and other types of meetings. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time today. Thank all of our panelists, and we'll see you hopefully again on June 7th. Take care.
Thank you for your participation. You can now subscribe to the AICPA Town Hall series on your favorite podcast platform, as well as watch archives on YouTube and AICPA TV. Tune in for live broadcasts Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time.